Chapter 099. Powderkick. Arranging a meeting with Diamond was easy this time. Not that it had ever been truly difficult to do that, but after learning the basics of the local language and customs over the restarts, the task had become totally trivial. He just had to approach the Terramachula in the right way, and they didn't even bother trying to turn him away. They went to fetch Diamond after only a few minutes of convincing, leaving Zorian to wait at the entrance. He was currently flipping through Damon's notebooks to pass the time, ignoring the strange looks given to him by the gate guards. The notebook was coded, but that couldn't stop Zorian at all. With his mental enhancements active, he could decode the text in an instant so long as he knew the key. Not that there was anything really interesting recorded in the notebooks. Diamond had written those in consultation with Zorian, so this was more about Zorian reminding himself what they put in there than discovering something new and exciting. He thought about trying to strike up a conversation with the guards currently observing him, but he knew from previous experience they weren't the talkative sort. It didn't help that his grasp of the local language was pretty shaky still. After a while, Zorian flipped through the last of the notebooks he had brought along and closed it shut. He impatiently rocked back and forth in place, taking in the sights around him through his various senses. In his mind sense and soul sense, the bees coming and going from the Terramachula estate looked like streams of tiny glittering stars. Pretty. He turned his back towards the gate and observed the wall of plant life surrounding the estate. He had been here many times in the past, but he had rarely paid much attention to the lands surrounding the place. Ignoring the guards and their alarmed inquiries about where he was going, he promptly wandered off into the wilds and started exploring. The jungle surrounding the Terramachula estate was kind of beautiful, he realized. No doubt a large part of that was deliberate design by the Terramachula, but still. There were paths cut into the vegetation to make the area more accessible to humans, and flowers were everywhere. Zorian followed the paths with no particular purpose in mind, mentally repelling snakes and biting insects whenever they got too close to him. No large predatory animals bothered him. The Terramachula had probably cleared them all out from the vicinity of their home. Eventually he stopped walking, staring at a particularly large white flower that had a great many bees swarming over it. A voice sounded from behind him not long afterwards. "It really is you. Damn it, Zorian, couldn't you have waited at the entrance just a little bit? If you wanted to look at bees, there are like a million of them inside the estate." It was Diamond, of course. Zorian slowly turned around, observing his eldest brother with a complex expression. Interacting with people he had gotten to know as temporary loopers before the end was always rather uncomfortable, and never was this as true as it was right now. The last time he saw Diamond, his brother had sacrificed himself to ensure Zorian could get out of the time loop alive. Svim had sacrificed himself too, of course. So had many other temporary loopers. However, Damon's choice to burn his whole life force to stabilize the passage into the real world had left a particularly deep impression on Zorian because it was Diamond. He would have never expected his eldest brother to sacrifice himself for him. He had never completely forgiven Diamond for what happened in his childhood, he realized. Interacting with his eldest brother in the time loop, he grudgingly came to accept he was being kind of petty and that he needed his brother's help, but a part of him would always see Diamond as an enemy. Now that part of him was angry and upset because he realized he owed a life debt to Diamond now. Even if the Diamond in front of him knew nothing of it, Zorian himself could never pretend it wasn't real. "What?" Diamond demanded. He sounded pretty annoyed. "Why are you staring at me like that? We haven't seen each other in a while, but I feel like I saw you only days ago," said Zorian after a second of pause. "Ha. Yes, your big brother is just as handsome and dashing as always," Diamond said, puffing his chest in an exaggerated manner. He then gave Zorian a scrutinizing look. "You've certainly changed, though." Like always, Diamond doubted his identity upon their first meeting. Quite sensible, considering the distances he would have to traverse just to end up here. "Yeah, well, people change rapidly during their teenage years," Zorian commented calmly. "No, it's more than that," Diamond said, shaking his head. "Even your posture is different. You look calmer. More confident." "Confident?" Zorian asked incredulously. He felt anything but confident at the moment. He was under a tremendous amount of stress at the moment. "Yeah," Diamond said. "It seems the academy has been a good influence on you." He looked around until he spotted a nearby fallen tree and then casually waved his hand at it. A gust of wind immediately blew away all the dirt and leaves on top of it. after which Daimon plopped down on the tree with a heavy sigh. He then gave Zorian a piercing look. "Why are you here, Zorian?" he asked. "Actually, scratch that. How are you here?" "Teleportation," Zorian said. In reality, he had opened a dimensional gate straight to Koth, but it was best to keep that secret for now. "I got someone to transport me directly to you." "Transport you directly? Zorian, do you have any idea how dangerous that is?" Daimon spluttered at him. "Of course I do," Zorian told him. "It's just that I had no choice but to do this. I had to talk to you as soon as possible." Daimon stared at him for a few seconds, discreetly casting a few divination spells at Zorian and considering something. Zorian patiently waited for him to finish and pretended he didn't notice the divination spells directed at him. "You're in trouble, aren't you?" Daimon finally asked with a long-suffering sigh. "Yes," Zorian admitted. "Big trouble." "I knew it," Daimon said flatly. "Damn it, Zorian. This is the sort of thing I'd expect out of Fortov, not you. Alright, just tell me what you have gotten yourself into and I'll see how I can help you. But you owe me big time for this. How did you get enough money to pay for teleportation here anyway? You didn't steal from mother and father, did you?" "No, I have plenty of money," Zorian said, shaking his head. Daimon swore under his breath. He seemed even more displeased with that idea than with Zorian stealing money from his family. In all likelihood, he assumed Zorian must have gotten the money illegally. Which, now that he thought about it, was pretty much correct. He got most of his current funds by stealing them from the invaders after all. Anyway, my issue is that invaders from Ulquin Ebesa and the cultists of the World Dragon are going to jointly invade Cyoria on the night of the summer festival in order to release the primordial trapped beneath the city and harvest the souls of everyone currently living there, Zorian summarized. Daimon gave him a strange look. "What?" he asked with an incredulous laugh. "Ulquin Ebesa, the Isle of the Exiles, is invading Cyoria through a permanent dimensional portal hidden beneath the city," Zorian said. "Aha," Daimon said slowly. "Much of the city's leadership has been subverted by the esoteric order of the Celestial Dragon, better known as the Cult of the World Dragon. They are working together with the Ebasans to keep the invasion preparations secret and will directly aid them when they actually invade the city," Zorian continued. "I see," Daimon said, giving him a sour look. "You are definitely Zorian. Only he would come here with such a ridiculous story. A real imposter would surely cobble together a far more convincing scheme than this." "I'm glad you think so," Zorian told him calmly. "Anyway, I don't really expect you to do much about the invasion itself. That whole situation is kind of beyond you. Unfortunately, the invaders know I'm one of the chief people opposing them, so they're going to go after you and the Terramachula to get leverage over me. That's why I hurried over here like this. I had to warn you before it was too late." Daimon suddenly frowned, becoming a little more serious. "Zorian, this isn't funny," Daimon protested severely. "I know," Zorian sighed. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry for getting you into this mess. All I can do is offer you information and maybe shelter if you need one. Though convincing the Terramachula to evacuate their ancestral estate and leave it at the mercy of the invaders is probably a tall order, so... You know what? I don't have time for your bullshit," Daimon told him, anger and annoyance mixing in his voice and posture. He got up from his seat and dusted himself off. "Now if you'll excuse me, I'll be going back to my work. When you're ready to have a serious talk, we can..." Zorian took the Imperial Orb out of his jacket pocket and held it in front of him in plain view of Daimon. Daimon froze at the sight, staring dumbfounded at the orb for several seconds. "Is that?" he began. "It's the Imperial Orb, yes," Zorian nodded. "Sorry about that. I know you've been looking for it for a while now, but I am in dire need of it." "What? Why?" Daimon said in an uncomprehending manner, unable to accept what he was seeing. "Considering my earlier story, it should be self-explanatory why I need it," Zorian noted. "Not that. I mean, arg." Daimon groaned. "How did you get that? Why do you have that? This doesn't make any sense." "Here," Zorian said, reaching into his jacket pocket again and handing Daimon the notebooks he had written for himself during the time loop. "Read this and things will hopefully make more sense." Daimon quickly snatched the notebooks out of Zorian's hands before giving the Imperial Orb an intense look. He then snatched the Imperial Orb as well before retreating back to his log to study them both. Zorian let the orb go unconcerned. Daimen was a great mage, but he was no Quatakikal. If Zorian wanted to get the orb back, he could do so at any time regardless of Daimen's wishes. Daimen flipped through the notebooks with one hand while fondling the Imperial orb in the other, occasionally muttering to himself in a low voice. What? This can't be right. Oh, I remember this one. I was going to check this in the next few months. How does he even know this? Daimen muttered. Wait a minute. He suddenly shut up and started pacing like a caged tiger, reading a particular passage. He eventually spun in place and turned towards Zorian in an aggressive manner. What is this? He demanded. Did I write this? Yes, Zorian confirmed. But I don't remember ever writing this, Daimen frowned. Yes, Zorian agreed. Don't you yes at me. Daimen protested. Give me an explanation. I can't, Zorian said, shaking his head. Oh come on, do you seriously expect me to believe you have no idea how this came to be? Daimen said, waving the notebook in front of Zorian's face. I know how the notebooks came to be, of course, Zorian said. I even helped you write them. It's just that I can't give you an explanation. Helped me write these? Daimen asked, looking at him strangely. He shook his head to clear his thoughts. No, ignore that question. Why can't you give me an explanation? Because lives depend on it, Zorian told him. I know I'm asking a lot here, but please trust me on this. The consequences of me telling you these things would be truly dire. My friend could die. I could die. The whole city of Cyoria could die. That thing again, Daimen frowned at him. This invasion of yours. In the end, everything comes back to that, Zorian confirmed, nodding. Oh, and give me back the Imperial orb, please. He stretched out his hand towards Daimen, observing his reaction. Daimen glanced at the Imperial orb in his hand, and then back at Zorian again, his expression deep in thought for a moment. Then he thrust the orb back into Zorian's outstretched hand and returned to his log, flipping through the notebooks again. I don't want to believe this, but there is so much stuff here, Daimen eventually said, his voice a little more subdued. These notebooks, they represent years of work and I remember nothing of it. Did I really lose years of my life somehow? It couldn't be. I would have noticed something this big. There is no way you can rip out such vast swathes of someone's memory without completely messing them up. As I said, I can't talk about that, Zorian told him. I can't accept that, Daimen said, not taking his eyes off the notebook he was reading. Zorian ignored him. You're in danger, he told Daimen. You and the Terramachula both. Originally I intended to evacuate my friends and Kiriel here to shelter them from the attack, and unfortunately the enemy got their hands on that information. Now they intend to attack this place to get their hands on some hostages to pressure me with. You need to alert the Terramachula and prepare yourself for the incoming attack, okay? Truthfully, Zorian could simply destroy Red Robe's simulacrum once it arrived at Koth, ending the possibility of the threat that way. However, he did not want to do that. As callous as it was, he felt that making Red Robe waste all his time and mana on this was preferable to him scrapping the plan entirely and trying to get him in some other fashion. A predictable threat was better than a completely unknown one. So this invasion of yours is so powerful their reach extends all the way to Koth as well? Daimen asked him, looking at him like he was an idiot. I already told you they have access to permanent gates, so why does this surprise you? Zorian asked, giving him the same look back. They only need one person to build a gate and they can shuffle their forces to and from any place on the globe. And what do you mean you wanted to evacuate Kiriel here? Isn't she with mother and father? Daimen continued, ignoring Zorian's remark. No, she's with me, Zorian said. Daimen made a show of looking around, even peering beneath the log he was sitting on. Zorian rolled his eyes at him. I left her in Cyoria, of course, Zorian told him. You left her alone while you traveled to Koth? Daimen asked flatly, sounding very unamused. Calm down, Zorian told him. It's only for a few hours. What? What do you mean, for a few hours? Daimen protested. Traveling to Koth takes days, even with teleportation. We'll discuss that later, okay? Zorian tried. No, we can't discuss that later. This whole thing is insane, and quite frankly I'm starting to question if you're even actually Zorian. Daimen said, giving him a heated glare. My brother is 15 years old and there is no way he would involve himself with something like this. In fact, even if he wanted to get involved, he doesn't have the skills to do so. Who are you really and what did you do to Zorian? Zorian was silent for a moment. It was a good question, really. In truth, the real Zorian had died at the start of the month. He had stolen his body and identity, letting his soul move on to the afterlife. Daimon wasn't actually wrong to think of him as an imposter. If the Daimon in front of him knew the truth, would he consider him his real brother, or would he do his best to avenge the real Zorian? Temporary Looper Daimon felt that sacrificing his life so that Zorian could replace the original was right and proper, but this Daimon might not agree. It was amusing, Zorian thought to himself bitterly. Years ago he wouldn't have given a damn about what Daimon thought of him and his choices. Now he found himself dreading his judgment, should his eldest brother ever find out the truth. "The notebook in your hand," said Zorian, pointing his finger at the book Daimon was tightly clutching in his hands, "is proof that things have happened which you have no memory of. Therefore, should it really surprise you that I am also not how you remember me? I could show you some skills you taught me. Minor things, but things that should be immediately obvious as your own magical insights. Would that convince you?" "I need an explanation," Daimon insisted, clutching the notebook in his hands so tightly his fingers turned white from blood loss. "I'll give you one at the end of the month," said Zorian. "After the summer festival." That was amusing too. Zorian had used this excuse so many times in the past while he was still inside the time loop. The only difference was that, back then, this offer meant he didn't really have to explain anything. The loop would restart before the deadline was reached. "After this invasion of yours," Daimon noted shrewdly. "Yes. As I said, lives depend on it," Zorian insisted. "You expect me to help you out for a mere promise of an explanation after the deed is done?" Daimon asked him. "No," Zorian said, shaking his head. "All I want is for you to take my warning seriously and to make sure the Terramachula do the same. So long as you survive the month and protect your fiancé's family from the invaders, I will consider this a success." Daimon stared at him angrily for a few seconds, before rising from his log again. "Let's go," he told Zorian. "Go where?" Zorian asked, taken aback at the statement. "To Cyoria," Daimon said matter-of-factly. "You're going back there now, aren't you?" "Yeah," Zorian admitted. "So you want to go with me?" "I need to confirm things personally," Daimon said. "And check up on Kiriel just in case." "Let's go." "Just like that?" Zorian asked for confirmation. "Is there a problem?" Daimon asked, frowning at him. "Well, aren't your fiancée and her family going to freak out if you suddenly disappear for a few days?" Zorian told him, cocking his head sideways. "I mean, surely you want to explain things to them before we set off." Of course, Zorian could just get him back to Koth in a few hours, but Daimon didn't really know he could open a gate between continents at will. Sure enough, Daimon's eyes widened in sudden realization and he slapped himself in the forehead a few times. "Focus, focus," he mumbled to himself. "Alright, so we're going to put the journey on hold for now. I need to talk to a few people first." In the depths of the ziggurat of the sun taken over by the Sol Rotham, a strange meeting was taking place. Zack and Zorian stood before a huge stone dais that contained this tribe's sacred fire. The high priest and his honor guard stood in front of the fire, looking down at the two arrivals. The massive bonfire writhed and crackled in a strange, somewhat ominous manner, casting light and shadows alike on the surrounding walls. Both sides silently scrutinized each other for a full minute before the Sol Rotham high priest decided to break the ice. "Welcome, guests," the high priest said. "We have been expecting you." "You have?" Zorian asked curiously. That was quite unusual, since their visit here was completely unannounced. "The angels have informed us of your coming," the high priest told them. Of course. Zorian had kind of expected that, to be honest. Funnily enough, the angels were not nearly as willing to contact human organizations to help them out. For example, Zack and Zorian had been in secret talks with the Triumvirate Church representatives, and at no point did the angels contact the church hierarchy to make the negotiations go more smoothly. But a random Sol Rotham tribe in the middle of the Zlotic desert merited them sending actual instruction? Just what made this tribe of devil wasps so special anyway? "Did they inform you why we were coming?" Zack asked them. "You're here to ask for help, of course," the high priest said easily. "A great battle is about to take place, pitting the allies of heaven against an ancient evil." "Well, yeah, that's what we're here for," Zack admitted after a second. "We accept," the high priest immediately said. "Just like that?" Zack asked incredulously, arching his eyebrow. What more is there to say? The high priest asked rhetorically. Only cowards would shirk from this kind of battle. To fight and die in the name of heaven is glorious. Surely you understand this? I can sense the mark of the angels shining bright on you. The mark of heaven, Zack said sourly. Yea. What an honor. The high priest's multifaceted eyes stared at Zack for a second, antennae twitching, trying to interpret his statement. Children often do not understand the importance of what their parents try to teach them, the high priest eventually remarked. What's that supposed to mean? Zack asked, annoyed. Just a random remark, the Sol Rotham high priest said, waving his hand in front of him dismissively. A very human gesture. Zorian wondered if Sol Rotham really did that or if the high priest was familiar enough with human customs to mimic their habits. I just realized you are quite young in human terms. We thank you for your help from the bottom of our hearts, Zorian quickly said, cutting Zack off from continuing the pointless argument. If it's all right with you, we'd like to discuss battle plans. Let's, agreed the high priest. Break. In a small out-of-the-way alley on the outskirts of Cyoria, Simulacrum No. 2 was painting a picture on a wall. It was a small abstract picture the size of a human head, vaguely resembling an eyeball if one viewed it from the right angle. To a casual observer, the painting would likely look like a random graffiti, the likes of which were quite common in Cyoria. The city was crawling with young mages after all, and they often used their newly gained magic skills to vandalize the walls of nearby buildings. Painting spells were beginner stuff and nearly every mage was capable of using them. But the painting was more than just idle amusement. So much more. After half an hour, the simulacrum carefully connected the last 2 lines of the drawing, causing a faint blue sigil to momentarily flash into existence within the painting, before quickly fading away from sight. After observing his handiwork for a few more seconds, the simulacrum placed his hand on the painting, activated the spell formula hidden within it, and then dived into it with his mind. Almost immediately, a sea of glowing suns popped into existence inside his mind, connected by a dense web of light. His mind raced from one sun to the next, his mind sense and telepathy manifesting itself throughout the whole network. There were sigils like this one scattered throughout most of the city by now, and through them Zorian's mind powers could envelop nearly all of Cyoria. Every building, every street was within his reach. He could see and invade the minds of anyone and anything from the lowest pigeon to the most high-ranking mage. He quickly retracted his mind from the sigil, afraid he would get noticed by someone. This had to stay an absolute secret. No one, not even his closest allies, were allowed to know about the sigil network. Taking one last look at the painting, Simulacrum No. 2 nodded to himself and wandered off to place more sigils elsewhere. Some of these paintings were bound to be found and erased by the city authorities and building owners, so it was best if he had some spares scattered around. 99 telepathy nodes on the wall, 99 telepathy nodes. Take one down, wipe it away, 98 telepathy nodes on the wall. The simulacrum hummed to himself. He had lots of work to do today. Break. In one of the empty academy classrooms, Zorian and Tinami sat facing each other, both silent. Well, for a few moments at least. Are you serious? Tinami asked incredulously. You can connect me with the legendary Arania? I'm not sure I would call them legendary, Zorian remarked. They're more common than you'd think and a bit underwhelming once you get to know them. But yes, I can indeed do that. He had gotten to talk to Tinami the same way he did in the past, by answering her call to have someone help her practice her telepathy skills. Naturally, the moment she experienced his innate mental skills, she wanted to know how he got them, and that quickly led the conversation to the topic of Arania. The point of all this, of course, was to get House Aope involved in preparations for the invasion. They had shown themselves to be quite resourceful and capable the one time he and Spear of Resolve had brought them into the whole invasion conspiracy. The awful, catastrophic outcome of that restart aside, the Aope had played their part perfectly. Hopefully the rumors of House Aope being bad luck were just superstitious nonsense and history wouldn't really repeat itself like that, right? After all, House Aope couldn't have reached its current status if it was really cursed. Paranoia aside, he was taking quite a risk by interacting with Tinami like this. Not because he thought House Aope would mess up their invasion preparations or anything like that, but because of the attention it would bring to him personally. Officially, Zorian was just connecting Tinami and House Aope with the Arania, and anything else they talked about had nothing to do with him. In practice, There was no way the leaders of House Aope would be naive enough to swallow that story. This was equivalent to putting a giant beacon on top of his head, telling the Aope leadership that he was worth paying attention to. Not exactly conducive to his plans to lay low after this whole thing is resolved. Still, there was no helping it. The situation was precarious enough that he needed their help if he could get it. "You know, you're more interesting than I thought you were," Tanami remarked, giving him a shrewd look. Thanks," Zorian said awkwardly. "Not that way," she hurriedly clarified. "What I meant was, you're venturing into the tunnels beneath the city and taking lessons from giant sapient spiders living there. I never would have guessed you were that driven." "I'll take that as a compliment," Zorian said after a short pause. "It is," Tanami confirmed. "By the way, how come you're missing so many classes? You know that looks pretty bad on your record, right? Even if you're more capable than you look, you should still pay attention to your reputation." "Don't lecture me. You sound like my mother," Zorian told her. Tanami didn't seem amused. "Anyway, I'm really busy with something right now and I can't come to class. I already told my mentor about it and he said it was all right. I should be able to start attending classes again after the summer festival. Assuming he was still alive and the city remained standing, that is. It's your life, I guess," Tanami shrugged. "These meetings, we'll continue with these, yes?" "Sure," Zorian said. "As long as you wish." "I get the feeling this is far more to my benefit than yours," Tanami noted. "Kind of," Zorian agreed. "But I am learning things here, so it's okay. This isn't a zero-sum game." He wasn't even lying. Attending these practice sessions with Tanami would hopefully clue him in on what kind of skill level was considered normal among human mind mages. He had a feeling that would be crucial information in the near future. Tanami gave him a weird look when he said that, though. "What?" he asked. "Nothing," she said quickly. "Nothing at all." In the skies above Ayaska Mansion, a lone iron beak was slowly circling the surrounding forest. The huge flock of iron beaks that guarded the place had long since noticed it and were watching it carefully, but they did feel a certain level of kinship with a fellow iron beak, even if it was a foreign one, so they did not attack it. The iron beak was actually Zorian, who had used a potion to shapeshift into the said bird. What he was doing was crazy, but if it could work. He slowly approached the iron beak flock, probing it with his mind and soul, looking for flock leaders and weak links. Sudamir and the invaders had these iron beaks controlled through blackmail, having seized their nests and subverted their leadership, but the flock had never submitted totally. It was intelligent enough to recognize blackmail and listen to simple orders, but also smart enough to hold a grudge and plot revenge. For hours Zorian circled the flock, speaking to them mind to mind, subtly subverting the mind magic used by invaders to control iron beak leaders. If it were anyone else doing it, they would have likely made a mistake somewhere and alerted the monster handlers that something was happening and that the flock had gone out of control. But Zorian was good. Too good for the Ibasan monster controllers to detect anything. As time went by, the iron beak flock paid more and more attention to the thoughts and images being fed into their heads. They were quiet and still, but their eyes shone with increasingly malicious glee. Break. The day of the summer festival swiftly approached. Most of the preparations were complete, but there was always more that could be done, and their actions got ever more frantic and desperate as the deadline loomed ever closer. Perhaps it was just Zorian's mind playing tricks on him, but it seemed to him that even uninvolved people like Amaya and Kiriel could sense the heavy atmosphere and became more serious as a result. As the end approached, Zack and Zorian evacuated most of the people close to them out of the city. Having already seen how that sort of thing could go wrong with their original plan to get everyone to Koth, they did not group everyone together at the same place like they had before. Instead, they picked 5 different sanctuaries and distributed people among them. In addition to Svim, Daimon also got himself involved with the evacuation, drawing on his own connections and experience to make things go more smoothly. His brother was still not happy with the amount of secrecy Zorian presented him with, but he seemed to realize the seriousness of the situation in the end, and agreed to cooperate with them until the situation was resolved. After the summer festival was over, however, he was going to come to Zorian for that explanation he was promised. He was quite vocal about that. Unfortunately, the evacuation wasn't entirely successful. While most people agreed to go into hiding when told there would be fighting in the city during the summer festival, Taven and Ray refused to go. In Taven's case, the reason was exactly what Zorian had been afraid of. She thought of it more as an opportunity to prove herself than a dangerous situation to avoid. She was a fully qualified battle mage after all. All she needed now was some actual field experience. Zorian understood all that, but he also understood that she was a known friend of his to their enemies, which meant they would be directing far more forces at her than her skills and reputation warranted. Her combat skills, impressive as they were for her age, were not enough. Was he selfish for not explaining that to her? Probably. If he told her the invaders would be gunning for her because of him, that would raise all sorts of questions about why that is so, and probably lead to her either finding out everything about him or feeling betrayed and hating him forever for it. But maybe her hating him forever was worth it if it meant she would survive the month. As for Ray, she was fine with having her daughter and husband out of danger, but she refused to go into hiding herself. Her explanation for this was that she was confident enough in her own combat skills and had to guard their house from looting. They were a very poor family, she said, and their move to Cyoria had exhausted all of their savings. If their house ended up looted or destroyed, they would be utterly ruined. Zorian was racking his head about how to talk her into abandoning the house. When Ray ended up inviting him to her house on her own initiative, Zorian was quite surprised at this, as this wasn't something Ray typically did. Did she somehow catch wind of his own involvement in all this? When he finally arrived at her place, however, he was greeted with another surprise. There were two more people already there. One was Hazlush, the detective that taught him divination and that he had already recruited into their anti-invasion efforts. He gave Zorian a curious look, but there was no trace of recognition in his eyes. He probably did not suspect Zorian. The other was shockingly Rainy. His classmate was clutching a cup of hot, steaming tea that Ray brought her with pale fingers, a blank expression on her face. She looked terrible. It took a while for her to wrench herself out of her thoughts and notice someone had arrived, but when she did, she gave him a shocked look. "Zorian, what are you doing here?" Rainy asked. "I invited him here," Ray said matter-of-factly. "Him? He's the guy you said could help me?" Rainy asked incredulously. "But he's just a student. What could he possibly do?" "I have a feeling Mr. Kaczynski here is more than just a student," said Ray, giving Zorian a knowing look. "In any case, why don't you tell Zorian what happened so that he knows what he's dealing with?" Hazlush observed the situation calmly, giving Zorian a thorough look but not saying anything. Zorian was really uncomfortable at the whole situation. Rainy stared at him questioningly for a few seconds, before she once again lowered her head and stared at her teacup in a defeated manner. "My brother has been kidnapped," she quietly said. Chapter 100. Sacrifice. Standing in Ree's home, Zorian ignored the curious gazes leveled at him from Ray and Hazlush and kept silent, calmly considering things. A million questions swam through his head. Why were these three gathered in Ree's house, despite the fact they shouldn't even know about each other? Why did Ray think he could help in this situation, and what were their enemies even thinking when they orchestrated this kidnapping? Was this some kind of strike against him and Zach? Why not go after all of his classmates, then? Rainy did not give him a lot of time to ponder those questions, though, and took his silence as a sign she should keep going. "My family doesn't live in Cyoria, so I didn't even know it happened at first. It wasn't until my family discovered some signs the kidnappers might have originated from Cyoria that they contacted me several days later and asked me for help," Rainy explained quietly. "I was shocked. Shocked that it happened and, She fumbled with her words for a few seconds before falling into an awkward silence and lowering her head even further. She looked quite pitiable at the moment. "That they asked for your help with this?" Zorian tried. She flinched slightly and gave him a shocked look for a second. Guilt, sadness, and confusion emanated from her in an equal mix. However, she quickly schooled her expression and cleared her throat with a trace of panic. "Why, yes, exactly. I'm just an academy student, what can I even do?" she said hurriedly. "I want to help my little brother, of course, but this is way above me. So I contacted the police about it, and they eventually pointed me at Detective Excederi here, who agreed to help. And here we are, I guess." She took a deep breath after finishing her explanation and gave Zorian a disbelieving but slightly hopeful look. "No offense, Zorian, but I'm still not sure how you can help me with this." "Neither am I," Zorian told her honestly. He could help, of course. How he should go about doing that, however, was something he couldn't decide on at the moment. Rainy's expression immediately dimmed after his admission, But he didn't let that bother him. He couldn't ruin all their plans just to assure her everything would be all right. He glanced at Ray and she glanced back at him, completely unconcerned with whether or not she had judged him wrong. What exactly gave her the confidence that he was someone who could make a difference here? No matter how he racked his head, he couldn't figure it out. "You're pretty calm about this," Hazlush commented from the side, giving him a shrewd look. "Panicking wouldn't help anyone," Zorian commented, unconcerned with the veiled accusation. "That wasn't enough to prove anything." "That's not how people work, but all right," Hazlush said with a light shrug. "I guess you're just an exceptionally calm person. This probably wasn't a deliberate attack on him and Zack," Zorian decided. While Rainey was one of their classmates, neither of them were very close to her in the time loop. Zorian did feel a certain kinship towards her, due to her messed-up family situation, but Silver Lake shouldn't know that. Therefore Jornak and the rest shouldn't either. The fact their enemies kidnapped Rainey's brother was probably just an accident. Since Zorian sabotaged their efforts to kidnap shifter children in the city of Cyoria and its surroundings, they looked further away for suitable targets. They needed those sacrifices after all. Without the primordial essence contained in the blood of shifter children, the primordial's prison couldn't be opened. In the time loop, the Sovereign Gate could serve as a substitute key, but out here in the real world that wasn't possible. As it turned out, Rainey's brother was one of the children the invaders ended up targeting in their expanded search. Did they even know they were targeting the family of someone who went to class with Zack and Zorian? Then again, even if they did, they may have thought it wouldn't matter. Rainey's relationship with her family was not exactly the best. It wouldn't be out of line to assume she would be glad to have her brother out of the picture. "I have to say though, I'm surprised to see you here," Zorian told Rainey. "I didn't know you and Ray knew each other." In fact, considering her disdain towards cat shifters, he would expect Rainey to purposely stay away from Ray. We don't," Rainey said, giving Ray an unsure look. "Detective Excederi is the one who brought me here. He thought she might be able to help. We have received reports of a group targeting shifter children some time ago, so we have been in contact with city shifters about the issue," Hazlush clarified, idly studying some kind of metal disc in his hands, flipping it over from time to time. Zorian recognized it as one of the communication devices the cultists and Abasins sometimes used to coordinate their actions. Apparently the detective hadn't been sitting idly all this time. "Miss Satchel was one of the less adversarial contacts we established during that time. I figured it wouldn't hurt to bring your classmate here to see if she had some insight into the situation. I'm just a humble housewife, so how could I offer insight into a situation like that?" Ray said with a slight smile, shaking her head lightly. "Still, the mother in me can't help but empathize with the pain of having your little brother stolen away by some heartless fiends. In another life, that could have been my little Notchka in his place, no?" She gave Zorian a piercing look, but he just raised his eyebrow at her in response. "What are you implying?" he bluntly asked after a few seconds. "I know you are connected to the evacuation effort that has been going on recently, and that it's not a minor connection either," Ray told him with an exaggerated sigh. "Your scent is present on almost everyone that has come to talk to me about getting Notchka and the rest of us out of the city. You have several adult friends who all treat you with respect, and even a little deference, more like you're their leader than a precocious teenager. You are known as a diligent and hardworking student, but you've been skipping all your classes for weeks now, doing God's know what. Stupid cat shifters and their superhuman sense of smell," Zorian grumbled internally. He was pretty sure she wouldn't have gotten suspicious and started connecting things if there were no scent clues to attract her attention. "Plus, when Miss Satchel mentioned you, I couldn't help but notice that your older brother Diamond, who is said to be in Koth, has been very active in the city lately," Hazlush added from the side. He placed the communication disc he was fiddling with in his pocket and focused his full attention on Zorian. Almost like some kind of emergency has popped up, forcing him to drop whatever he had been doing to rush back to Eldamar, no? "Oh come on. Me and my brother almost never interact with one another," Zorian told him. "You seem to have investigated me, surely you know that much? How would I know anything about what he has been doing? But you do know he's here in Cyoria right now?" Hazlush pressed. "Of course. He dropped by to let me know he's in the city. It's just common courtesy. We are family after all," Zorian said with a shrug. He saw no point in telling an obvious lie and pretending he never saw Diamond recently. Do you two seriously believe Zorian is some kind of secret agent? Rainey asked incredulously from the side, her eyes shifting between the three of them in rapid succession. He definitely knows more than he lets on, Ray shrugged. Considering the situation, I figured it wouldn't hurt to try to wring some information out of him. It's your brother's life on the line here. It doesn't have to be, Rainey tried anxiously. Maybe it's just a ransom thing and they just haven't gotten to state their demands. You're lying to yourself and you know it, Ray said, giving her a knowing look. When a shifter child gets kidnapped, 9 times out of 10 it's because the kidnappers want their blood essence. With so much time having passed, it's a question whether your brother is still alive at this point. Rainey paled at the reminder. Let's not be all doom and gloom here. I'm sure her brother is still very much alive, Haslush hurriedly assured Rainey. The ritual they are kidnapping all these children for is only due to happen on the night of the summer festival. They need to keep her brother alive for a while yet. If you say so, Ray said. Still, that date is just around the corner. If that's our deadline, we don't really have much to work with. Look, what do you even expect of me? Zorian asked Ray, frowning at her slightly. I don't know where any kidnapped children are being kept. Do you think I would just sit on that information if I knew? It wasn't like Zack and Zorian didn't try to sabotage the primordial release ritual by denying the invaders the needed sacrifices. The problem was that they couldn't possibly round up every shifter child on the continent and hide them away. No matter how thorough they were, their enemies could always throw a wider net and go after some shifter community that Zack and Zorian didn't even know about. Jornak had spent decades preparing for this. Zorian suspected the power-mad lawyer would have found the needed sacrifices no matter what they did. Of course, if Zack and Zorian could locate the place where the shifter children were being kept, he was all for launching a rescue operation. Without the needed sacrifices, Panic-Seth couldn't get free, which would be an automatic win in a sense. It would be worth it to trigger the final battle before the summer festival if they could inflict such a critical blow on their opposition. The problem was that Zorian genuinely had no idea where Rainey's brother could be held. It could very well be that those children were being kept on Ulquinibesa, Koth, or some other distant place. They could be anywhere on the planet, so finding them was like searching for a needle in a haystack. I don't know, Ray admitted. I know you're involved with this somehow, but I don't know in what way. Maybe you really can't do anything for poor Rainey here, but I'm hoping you can. I know she thinks I'm just a scheming, skulking cat, but I really do want to help her. What? Rainey protested. I don't. It's fine, Ray said with a chuckle, gesturing with her hand towards Rainey to quiet her down. I get it. There's too much bad blood between our peoples to let go on a whim. And I get why Zorian here is feeling defensive and denying everything. I suppose it must feel like I led him here into some sort of ambush. Didn't you? Zorian asked, raising his eyebrow at her. No, well yes, I guess I kind of did, Ray admitted. But considering you've been less than honest with me these past few weeks, I think you should be able to stomach a little underhandedness. Zorian opened his mouth to defend himself, but she raised her palm to stop him. I understand, Ray said. I'm not angry with you. You wanted to get your sister's friend and her family out of danger, but you didn't want to reveal your secrets. I would have probably made the same choice in your place. I'm just curious, was our first meeting really an accident? Yes, Zorian said easily. From a certain perspective it was true. I'm not terribly social. If my little sister wasn't such a giant busybody and insisted I accompany Notchka to her home, the idea would have never occurred to me. Getting Notchka's bike out of the river so she could stop crying would be enough for me. Oh, is that what really happened? Ray laughed. You know, Notchka later told me a bunch of mean boys were trying to take her bike away from her and you chased them off and then escorted her home in case they came back. Oops. You should have synchronized stories with Notchka apparently. You didn't think it was a big secret. Of course Notchka's version is the correct one, Zorian assured her. Don't mind my earlier ramblings, I just got confused for a moment. Sure, Ray said indulgently. It was very heroic of you to defend my precious daughter from random ruffians like that. For a while Haslush and Rainey watched them curiously as they talked, not interrupting their interaction. However, while Haslush was a grown man and an experienced detective, Rainey was just a teenager and under a lot of stress at the moment. As such, she soon became impatient. Zorian, can you help me with this or not? She loudly asked, impatience and frustration in her voice. Zorian stared at her for a second before opening his mouth to apologize and tell her he was just an academy student and that there was nothing he could do to help her brother. But then he shut his mouth and started thinking about something. It suddenly dawned on him that their enemies may have made a huge mistake when they kidnapped Rainey's brother. After a few seconds, he focused back on the red-headed girl staring at him expectantly and stared back straight into her eyes. "You know what?" he told her. "I actually think there is something I can do. But I'm going to need your help." Hazlush silently leaned forward, his lazy-looking posture shifting into one of alertness. "Me?" she asked, taken aback. She shifted in her seat uncomfortably. "But I'm just an academy student." "So am I," Zorian told her. "Here's what we need to do." In the port city of Luja, there was a small abandoned warehouse. It was a dark, uninviting place. The walls were moldy and crumbling, the floors were full of rat droppings and glass shards from broken bottles, and the windows and doors were crudely barricaded with wooden boards. There were a number of such places in Luja, as it was a large port town where trading companies were starting up and going bankrupt on a regular basis. Most abandoned warehouses would eventually find a new buyer and be fixed up into usable condition, but it wasn't unusual for places like this to stay unoccupied for months or even years as old owners tried to hold on to them in hopes of getting a better price later. As it happened though, this particular place held a dark secret. In the back of the warehouse, shielded from view by a mountain of rotting crates and boards, there was a black egg-like object attached to the floor with a mass of root-like tendrils. Spiral lines were etched into the black oval, beginning at the bottom and reaching all the way to the tip. Perceptive individuals would note that the oval almost looked like a giant black flower bulb on the verge of unfolding into a proper flower. Or maybe a container, patiently waiting for the day it could unleash its contents upon its oblivious surroundings. Zack, Zorian and Alanik stood some distance away from the black oval, staring at it grimly. They dared not approach lest they activate the hidden wards and traps strategically placed around it. "This is the fourth one we found," Alanik commented. "One in Cyoria, 2 in Corsa and now 1 in Luja. Just how many wraith bombs did these people make?" "There has to be more than one of these things in Cyoria," Zorian commented. "There is no way they would place 2 in Corsa and then leave only 1 for Cyoria. Corsa is important, but Cyoria is a far more critical location. We just haven't found the others." "There are probably a few in the capital city as well," Zack said. "Jornak seems to have a downright personal grudge with our country's leadership. No way would he miss the chance to strike at them at the heart of their power. Plus, considering what he said about Sulamnon and Fokrinia, there's bound to be a few of these bombs reserved for them as well. We'll never be able to find more than a fraction of them," Alanik commented grimly. "This is going to be a disaster. Entire city districts could end up being devoured by wraiths. The cleanup will take years." He glanced at Zack and Zorian unhappily, but neither of them said anything. There was nothing to say really. They knew this as well. "You still don't know how to neutralize these things without triggering them?" Alanik asked with a trace of resignation in his voice. He already suspected the answer he was going to get. Sure enough, Zack and Zorian shook their heads in denial. "They're superbly well made," Zorian told him. "Jornak must have spent ages refining the design in the time loop. Any tampering I can think of will set one off as well as alert our enemies to our actions. The only way we can deal with these is by employing the same tactics we used on the previous wraith bombs. Set up a specialized ward field just outside the bomb's defensive field and try to contain the wraiths once they're released. It should be effective, but I obviously haven't tested it, so." "I see," Alanik said. He turned around towards the wraith bomb again, staring at it as if that was going to suddenly provide him with some new insights. "You don't have to waste time on that. I'll contact the church higher-ups and send them to perform another containment job here. I still say we should trigger these things the moment we find them and deal with the consequences." "And I still say we shouldn't," Zorian argued back. "These wraith bombs can be harmlessly disarmed. Jornak has a method to do so, I'm sure. I just need to rip it out of his head." "You really think you can do that?" Zack asked doubtfully. "We'd have to capture Jornak alive for that to happen. That seems difficult. These wraith bombs are set to collectively go off the instant Jornak dies, so we want to avoid killing him if at all possible anyway," Zorian pointed out. "Not to mention the other surprises he may have left for us in the case of his death." For all his megalomania, he clearly realized there's a real chance he's going to lose this conflict and made contingencies to account for it. Zack snorted derisively. Too many contingencies if you ask me, Zack said. He puts so much time into making sure everyone suffers if he loses. What does he even gain out of that? It's just petty. Sore loser. Well, we were just discussing how we should try to capture him instead of killing him outright, Olenek noted. So it's not just pettiness. But yes, I get the feeling this is more than just about power for Jornak. He wants revenge. Revenge? Zack asked, surprised. On who? Everyone, Olenek said, still staring at the black oval in front of them. The smooth, glossy surface of the object squirmed and shuddered, as if hundreds of worms were moving just beneath the surface, before once again becoming still and quiet. Neither of the three were disturbed at the sight. Wraith bombs did that sometimes. On occasion one could even see a faint outline of hands and faces on the surface of the oval, leering, maddened, crying, screaming, begging, as if a person was desperately trying to break out from the inside before being forcibly wrenched back into the depths of the device. Speaking from personal experience here, maybe? Zack tried, giving Olenek a curious look. Olenek didn't say anything for a second. I was a very angry person when I was young, he eventually said. I don't want to talk about it. All three stayed silent for a few seconds, and Zorian quietly considered the battle priest's words. Olenek had never told them about his past, and Zorian had always respected that. Truthfully, he sometimes wondered why the man was so helpful to them in the first place. Did he see them as young troublemakers that needed to be steered from a dark path, just like someone had once steered him away from one? Or was he simply so discerning that he could accurately judge them with even the slightest exposure? Whatever the answer, Zorian was grateful for the priest's help and had no desire to open old wounds if he didn't have to. As for the priest's speculation of Jornak's motivation, well, it could be true. Jornak, the old Jornak, the one that Zorian had talked to in the time loop, was definitely bitter and resentful about having his rightful inheritance stolen away from him. He could see how that could grow and fester once he became a temporary looper and looked into the abyss of corruption and power plays that was Altasian politics. In the end, it didn't even matter. No matter what reasons he had, Zorian would still have to defeat him in the end. In somewhat unrelated news, Silver Lake is gone. Zorian suddenly spoke up, breaking the silence. The old Silver Lake, that is. She just packed up everything portable out of her hideout and disappeared one day. I don't have the faintest idea where she went. Do you think she'll join the battle on our enemy's side? Zack asked, frowning. No, I doubt it, Zorian said. I think she just realized she was being heavily scrutinized by some very powerful forces and got spooked. She's a coward. No way she would dive into this conflict unless someone arm-twisted her into it, and New Silver Lake seemed like she wouldn't support that. If she's really going to stay out of this, I'm fine with her going away, Zack shrugged. One less thing to worry about. I've heard reports that several mercenary companies from the neighboring countries have taken on secretive, well-paid contracts, Olenek said. I'm not completely sure, but I strongly suspect our enemies have bought themselves some more soldiers for the final battle. Zack scowled at the news, uttering a nasty curse. Zorian's reaction was more restrained, but his face still darkened in response. The invaders have in general been getting restless and increasingly reckless as of late. Their preparations might be nearing their end, Olenek continued, becoming more animated. What are we waiting for? We should attack now and seize the initiative. Well, the idea was always to be proactive and launch an attack before the day of the summer festival, Zack said, giving Zorian a questioning look. However, Zorian keeps stalling, saying he needs more time. So the timing depends on him, really. Alanek's eyes softened a bit at the statement, his posture deflating. The situation with Zack, right? He asked softly. Did you find? I'm sorry. I couldn't find a solution no matter where I looked, Zorian said with a wooden voice, not a trace of emotion on his face. It's fine, Zack sighed. I've already come to terms with things. I've already written my final will and everything. Right. In any case, you're right. There is no point in waiting anymore. We're just giving our enemies more time. We'll attack 2 days from now, the day before the summer festival. I still have one final idea I want to try, Zorian said. The shifter thing? Zack asked curiously. You really think that will work? If it does, it will be a huge success, Zorian pointed out. True, Zack agreed. It's worth a try. Just outside of Cyoria, there was a spherical ritual room made by Zorian and his simulacrums. Everything here was carefully crafted for only one purpose: to power up and enhance one particular divination spell. All of the walls were densely packed with complicated series of lines and endless rows of cryptic sigils, all made from precious metals and rare alchemical materials. The ground was etched with no less than 6 blood-red magical circles, and in the center stood a small golden cube with a seemingly mundane pottery bowl. Hundreds of tiny white stars hung in the air, illuminating the space. These were actually tiny dimensional gates that connected the room to various places in the country and beyond. Every place that was likely to house the kidnapped shifter children, in Zorian's opinion. Currently the ritual room contained Rainy, Hazlush, Ray, and 3 of Zorian's simulacrums. 2 simulacrums were disguised as adult mages, grim and silent, and were here for the sake of pretending this was a secret government operation, rather than something Zorian set up himself. Only one of them would be necessary for the ritual itself, but having 2 wouldn't hurt, and it would be more realistic for something of this scale to require multiple people to execute. The last simulacrum looked just like Zorian and pretended to be the original. His job was mostly to stay next to Hazlush and Ray and pretend to be normal. Though considering the looks on their faces as they studied the ritual grounds, he felt he mostly failed at that already. Mr. Kaczynski. I knew you couldn't be normal, but I have to say I didn't expect you're connected to people like this, Ray said quietly. For the first time since he met her, she didn't sound confident and in control, and he instead sensed a trace of fear in her voice. You have no idea, Hazlush said, his voice quivering. His reaction was even more extreme than Ray's. He seemed downright horrified by what he was seeing. More money went into this room than my entire police department gets in a year. And it's all meant to empower one specific spell that is only useful for this one thing. The whole thing will be useless after today. The extravagance is mind-boggling. Simulacrum number 1 shifted in place, a little uncomfortable. Zorian's perspective on money was a little skewed. Yeah, this could be a real problem in the future, but at the moment he really didn't care. He'd pay twice this much if he thought it would help. You don't even understand what this room means, do you? Hazlush asked Zorian, giving him a strange look. No, the simulacrum told him uncertainly. And he really didn't. Sure, the room was the best thing he could make on short notice, which probably made it amazing by regular mage's standards, but he was sure a country as big and influential as Eldamar could pull this off. It was kind of funny, really. The original went through so much trouble to make his abilities seem more humble than they were and to attribute his achievements to some nebulous government organization. He'd even succeeded. But in the end, the mere fact he was associated with people like that was enough to alarm and awe Hazlush and Ray. He'd normally get a headache out of this, but he was just a simulacrum and wouldn't even exist in a couple of hours, so imagining Zorian having to deal with this in the future just made him laugh. "Aw, forget it," Hazlush sighed. "You're still too young and inexperienced. You're tangling with some really dangerous stuff is all I'm going to say." "Don't I know it," the simulacrum mumbled. Rainy, on the other hand, was currently sitting in the middle of the ritual room, next to the golden cube and the bowl, taking deep breaths to calm herself. She was chanting some sort of song to herself in a language Zorian's simulacrum couldn't recognize. It was probably the language of her tribe. The 2 disguised simulacrums were also sitting around the cube, forming a triangular formation around it together with Rainy. They were naturally far more calm and collected, and patiently waited for Rainy to psych herself for the upcoming ritual. The pressure on her was enormous. This ritual would succeed or fail purely based on how she performed. Simulacrum number 1 was certain his fellow simulacrums would perform their part of the ritual flawlessly, but the core part of the divination ritual was something only Rainy could do, because it was her brother they were trying to track down with the spell. Divination spells were more effective the more they had to work with. In case of tracking spells, the caster needed something connected to the target. A personal item, a drop of blood, things like that. They were even more effective if the caster was personally connected to the target in some way. If they had personally spoken to the target at some point, if they were friends with them, or if they were married to one another. As far as connections go, though, there were few things more potent than being literal family. Parent and child, brother and sister. And more potent still was to use literal blood magic to form a resonance between their common bloodline. Finally, there was the primordial essence that existed in the blood of every shifter. Rainey was already a teenager, so most of that primordial essence was gone, integrated into her body and soul. However, traces of it should remain still. Zorian had spent quite some time with the leaders of the cult of the World Dragon, studying their method of releasing Panikseth, and he knew how they used primordial essence to resonate with the one in the prison and act as a key. The same method could be used to fool any mortal defensive ward or anti-divination method. Rainey and her brother were siblings. Even if they had never interacted much, the link between them was strong. Blood magic could make it even stronger. They also both had primordial essence in their blood, and that could be used to bypass any form of divination defense the invaders put up around her brother and the rest of the sacrifices. If the ritual they were about to undertake successfully located Rainey's brother, Zack and Zorian could liberate all the shifter children the invaders gathered during the past few weeks. Not only did that mean doing a good deed and saving a bunch of children from a gruesome death, it would also irreparably sabotage the Panikseth release ritual. There was only one day before the summer festival. There was no way that the invaders could gather another batch of sacrifices in that short of a time. There were a lot of ways the ritual could fail even if they executed it flawlessly. For one thing, Zorian couldn't blanket the entire planet with dimensional gates, no matter how small they were. Not even close. It was possible he had failed to pick the right place to search at, in which case all of this was for naught. It was also possible that the invaders were keeping all the kidnapped children separated until the final moment, in which case they will just end up saving Rainey's brother and no one else. Their enemies also may have gathered enough spare children to form a second group, in which case they could still try to release Panikseth as normal. Zorian had a good feeling about this, though. This could work, he was sure of it. The only question now was whether Rainey was capable of doing her part. The necessary blood magic itself wasn't that difficult. Blood magic was famously easy to perform. Too easy according to some. Additionally, blood magic tracking spells were a very common use of blood magic, and there was no need for Zorian to reinvent the wheel to make one. There were plenty of tried-and-true methods that Rainey could use for her attempt. It was still blood magic, however. Rainey would have to ritually cut herself during the casting, and remain clear-headed despite the resulting pain. The mana shaping requirements for successful casting were low, but Rainey was a total beginner when it came to magic, so even that may be too much for her. Finally, whether she succeeded or failed, she would be severely weakened for at least a week after the attempt, and the traces of primordial essence in her blood would be spent. He had one try. Not one more. If she made even a single mistake, the whole ritual would be ruined, and that would be it. So Zorian's simulacrums patiently waited, not trying to hurry her up in any way. Likewise, on the edge of the ritual room, Ray, Hazlush, and the simulacrum that actually looked like Zorian patiently waited as well. Well, simulacrum number 1 patiently waited. Hazlush and Ray were clearly anxious as hell about the eventual result of the ritual. The center of the ritual circle is protected from sounds, right? Hazlush softly asked simulacrum number 1. They can't hear us if we talk? Yes, the simulacrum calmly said. It's also protected against outside mana intrusion and the like. Unless you really go out of the way to make yourself known, you shouldn't be able to disturb them. Of course, simulacrum number 1 was always mentally connected with his fellow simulacrums and the original, but the 2 simulacrums participating in the ritual were too experienced and skilled to be distracted by something like that. What's up with you, kid? Hazlush complained, glaring at him slightly. Are you made of ice or something? I'm just naturally stoic, the simulacrum bragged, puffing his chest up proudly. It's okay, old man, you'll learn how to be as cool as me one of these days. Hazlush clacked his tongue at the response and no longer bothered to talk to him. I've looked into your classmate's family situation, Ray commented idly. Oh, the simulacrum said, raising an eyebrow at her. It seems Rainey's relationship with her family is less than harmonious, Ray said, cocking her head to the side and closing her eyes as if listening to something. Her brother essentially replaced her as the clan heir when he was born. There are rumors that she was extremely resentful about it. Simulacrum number 1 said nothing. You knew, Ray said after a while. Yeah, the simulacrum admitted. Yeah, I did. You think she's going to purposely botch the spell? Hazlush asked, frowning. Quite the contrary, Ray said calmly, shaking her head. I think she's desperate for it to succeed. She probably wished ill on her brother a lot, and now that it finally happened she feels guilty and responsible for it. Shifter tribes have a somewhat superstitious view of curses. Wishing misfortune to someone in your head is not just harmless catharsis to a lot of them. That's true for a lot of regular people too, Hazlush shrugged. It's just mages that really disdain that kind of thinking. Ray hummed thoughtfully but did not respond. The whole group suddenly became silent as it became obvious that Rainey was finally ready to begin with the ritual. The red-headed wolf shifter started chanting, softly at first but getting more confident as time went on. Her hand trembled as she raised a dagger above her palm and slashed into it once, twice, thrice. The motions were crude and she cut a little more deeply than was really necessary, but Simulacrum No. 1 supposed that was better than being too timid. She held her bloodied hand above the simple-looking pottery bowl and dropped blood into it. The bowl promptly lit up with glowing blood-red lines and diagrams, and a barely perceptible magical pulse spread out from the golden cube upon which the bowl sat. The white stars above them dimmed and brightened like 100 tiny hearts. Thin, hair-like streams of blood, barely visible from where Simulacrum No. 1 was standing, rose from the bowl and reached for the tiny dimensional gates above it. Rainey loudly gasped and swayed unsteadily as some of her life force left her, some of the threads reaching for the wounds on her hand like dozens of hungry leeches. Overwhelmed by the pain and vertigo, she dropped her dagger and almost collapsed face-first into the bowl in front of her. But with the support of 2 disguised simulacrums and her own willpower, she managed to retain consciousness. Gritting her teeth, she started slowly making gestures with her healthy hand. Finally, the last gesture of the spell was made and everything snapped into place. The dimensional gates floating above them shone with blinding light, forcing Hazlush and Ray to shield their eyes, and a flood of information entered the minds of the 3 simulacrums present. So much information. Hundreds of places, most of them completely disconnected from each other, all of them mixing together into a giant incomprehensible mess. The spell, too vast in scope, struggled to narrow down the search on its own. It passed the task to the caster of the spell. If Rainey was doing this alone, she would have outright failed here. A beginner mage simply wasn't capable of controlling a spell of this sophistication and magnitude. But she wasn't doing this alone. Zorian's simulacrums were present and they were capable. In fact, a single one of them would have sufficed. Having 3 of them do this together was just overkill. After a few seconds, Simulacrum No. 1 smiled. Almost immediately afterwards, a quick message was sent to the original by all 3 simulacrums. It only consisted of a single word. Success. Simulacrum No. 1 mumbled. Break. Sitting next to a table full of battle maps, surrounded by Zack, Svim, Alanik and the rest of the members of their little conspiracy, Zorian suddenly became alert and cleared his throat to get the attention of other people in the room. They immediately stopped whatever argument they were having and turned to him. "We found them," Zorian said. "Start the attack." On a peaceful and sunny day, just one day before the summer festival, the city of Cyoria suddenly went to hell. It was around noon when, without warning, dozens of places in the city suddenly launched volleys of magical artillery projectiles to some unseen targets just outside the city. These targets, almost as if they had been expecting something like this might happen, immediately responded with an artillery barrage of their own. In a matter of minutes, the city was burning. Numerous buildings had been partially or completely destroyed, and rogue fire elementals started wandering the city, setting everything they encountered ablaze. Neither of the 2 sides were done yet, though, and the exchange of magical artillery continued on for quite some time. Then the monsters came. Skeletons, war trolls, giant lizards, massive flocks of iron beaks. All of these came pouring out of the local underworld, spreading chaos as they went. A lot of these invading monsters met a grisly end, triggering hidden traps when they tried to move through upper levels of Cyoria's underworld, almost as if someone had foreseen their invasion routes. A lot more were held back in the depths of the earth, fighting some unseen enemy beneath the city. But even the fraction of the forces that reached the surface was nothing to scoff at. The final battle had begun. Soon the leaders of the 2 opposing forces would clash as well.